Hello, good evening. I'm Brett, and I'm your host for this evening. If, like me, you enjoy investigating spine-tingling stories and mysterious cold cases, diving deep into the most chilling unsolved murders, you've come to the right place. Welcome to Sunday Night Mystery. And tonight, we investigate another cold case from the files of Sunday Night Mystery. We also have books to accompany the show outlining all the details of our cases. Just visit Amazon and search Sunday Night Mystery. The town of Hythe, nestled along the southern coast, seemed like a place out of time. A quiet seaside retreat where the sound of waves gently lapping on the shore could lull even the most restless soul into complacency. But beneath the veneer of sleepy charm, a darkness lingered. One that had seeped into the very soil of the town, like a poison. Quiet, yet insidious. For years, the house on Northcote Road had stood as a reminder of Hythe's forgotten past. A Victorian cottage, its once pristine white paint now weathered and chipped by years of neglect. The garden, once lush and vibrant, had long since been overtaken by tangled ivy and wild brambles. It was as though the house had turned inward, isolating itself from the world, just like its inhabitant, Rose Lively. Rose was 73 years old when she was found dead in her home, the victim of a brutal stabbing that would send shockwaves throughout the town. To most, she had been little more than a fading figure, an elderly woman who lived alone, avoided company, and who, in the years leading up to her death, had become something of a local ghost. Yet, behind her quiet, solitary existence lay a life filled with unspoken stories, unshed tears, and untold betrayals. Michael, Rose's great-nephew, had always known her as little more than a distant relative, a name mentioned occasionally at family gatherings, but never one to stir up any real interest. He had heard of her tragic death when he was young, but it had always felt like a ghost story, a distant tragedy that didn't quite touch his own life. Now, decades later, as Michael embarked on a journey of tracing his family's history, Rose's name resurfaced in his research. He found himself inexplicably drawn to her story, compelled by a sense of unfinished business. Why had she lived alone? What had happened in her past? And most haunting of all, who had killed her? His investigation began innocently enough, but the more Michael uncovered, the deeper the mystery grew. Rose had been a woman shrouded in secrets, and as he dug further, he discovered that her tragic death was the culmination of a lifetime of hidden pain, thwarted desires, and familial rejection. Rose had once been a vibrant woman, an intelligent and ambitious schoolteacher, highly respected in her community. She had dreamed of marrying, of raising children, of building a family, but somewhere along the way, her dreams had been shattered, replaced by an overwhelming sense of loneliness that eventually consumed her. The man she had once loved, Edward Marks, was a shadow in her past, an enigmatic figure whose disappearance had been tied to Rose's deep personal loss. Their relationship had been passionate, full of promise, but it had ended abruptly. Edward had vanished from Rose's life, with no explanation, and she had never recovered from the heartbreak. Rumours swirled around Edward's disappearance. Some said he'd simply moved away. Others whispered that he'd run afoul of the law, involved in shady dealings that forced him to leave in the dead of night. But whatever the truth, Rose had never let go of Edward. Even in the final years of her life, she would speak of him in wistful tones, as if the memory of him was the only thing that kept her tethered to this world. On the night of Rose's death, Hythe was shrouded in a heavy mist, the kind that clung to everything, wrapping the town in a suffocating embrace. Neighbours heard nothing out of the ordinary. No screams, no shuffling footsteps. Rose's house was tucked away at the end of Northcote Road. Away from the main thoroughfare, she was known to keep herself to herself. Her daily routines predictable and monotonous. No one could have anticipated that her life would end in such a violent fashion. Her body was discovered the following morning by a local gardener who had come to tend her garden. Rose's body was slumped in her sitting room, a pool of blood staining the old wooden floors beneath it. Her face was frozen in terror, her eyes wide open in shock and disbelief. She'd been stabbed more than a dozen times, the wounds deep and jagged, as if the killer had attacked her in a frenzy, driven by a force beyond reason. The police quickly surmised that the murder was a robbery gone wrong. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing appeared to be missing from the house. Rose had no wealth or valuables to speak of, leading the investigators to consider that the crime had been a spur-of-the-moment decision. But there was something unsettling about the brutality of the attack. This wasn't a simple burglary gone wrong. This seemed personal. The theory that Rose had been killed by someone she knew began to take shape. Perhaps the killer was someone from her past, someone who knew her well enough to gain access to her home without raising suspicion. But if that were the case, why had Rose been so brutally murdered? What had driven the killer to such rage? Michael's investigation began to take him down dark paths, ones that led him to places he'd never expected. He learned more about Rose's failed engagement to Edward Marks, a man who, by all accounts, had disappeared without a trace. But there were whispers, hushed voices in the town that spoke of a deeper connection between Rose and Edward, one that went beyond simple romance. Edward had returned to Hythe several years before Rose's death, but he had kept a low profile, slipping back into the shadows of the town. Michael was struck by the timing. Could Edward have had something to do with her death? Had the man she'd loved and perhaps still loved returned to settle old scores? The more Michael dug, the more disturbing the connections became. It seemed that Rose's past was intertwined with the dark undercurrents of Hythe itself. There were stories of financial ruin, of shady dealings with local businessmen, of whispered affairs and betrayals. Rose, it seemed, had been entangled in a world she could never fully escape. A world where loyalty was fleeting and trust was a luxury few could afford. The police investigation quickly hit a dead end. Despite their best efforts, no one came forward with useful information. It was as if the entire town had closed ranks, unwilling to speak out. Theories ran rampant. Was Rose's death the result of a family dispute, a former lover seeking revenge, or Perhaps an even darker, more insidious motive at play. Yet the silence remained. The townspeople kept their heads down, their mouths shut. Fear, or perhaps loyalty, held them back from revealing the truth. Michael's search led him to other unsettling discoveries. A former local detective, now retired, told him that there had been rumours at the time of Rose's murder, rumours that suggested the killer had been shielded by someone close to him. Perhaps a family member, or even a lover. The theory that the murderer was protected by the very community that should have brought him to justice began to gain traction. And then there were the strange occurrences that Michael uncovered. Those who claimed to have seen Edward Marks around the time of the murder. Those who remembered strange meetings in the dead of night. Had Rose's killer been in plain sight all along? Was the person who had murdered her someone so deeply entrenched in the town's secrets that no one dared to speak his name? As Michael's investigation deepened, he uncovered a shocking revelation. Edward Marks had not just been involved in Rose's life, he'd been entangled in a far more sinister scheme. Edward had been deeply involved in a series of financial scandals in the town, some of which had implicated Rose. There had been a business deal, a betrayal, and a fall from grace that had ruined both Edward and Rose. But there was more. Michael discovered that the murder was not just the result of rage, it was the culmination of a long simmering vendetta. Edward had returned to Hythe, not just to rekindle an old love, but to settle an old score. And Rose, despite her age, had been the key to unlocking a dangerous secret. A secret so dark, so entwined with the town's own fabric, that it had to be silenced at any cost. The murder of Rose Lively remains unsolved, buried beneath layers of secrets, fear and denial. Michael, driven by a need for closure, continues to search for answers, though he knows that the truth may never be fully revealed. In Hythe, where every corner holds a story and every face hides a secret, Rose's death is but one of many untold tragedies. Yet her ghost lingers on, haunting the town with one question that refuses to die. Who killed Rose Lively? And why? The answer, it seems, lies buried in the darkness of Hythe, where the town's ghosts and its living inhabitants are bound by a shared secret that they may never be brave enough to face. If you have any information about tonight's or any of the cases that we feature, please contact your local authorities. Stay safe, and until next time, keep questioning, keep searching, and keep unraveling the mysteries of our world. Because time, like a merciless predator, marches on, leaving behind shattered dreams and broken promises. Yet, amidst those shadows of despair, glimmers of hope remain. Join us next time as we delve into another chilling mystery that continues to confound investigators and haunt communities. Until then, stay vigilant and never forget those who've been lost to the shadows. Until next week, stay safe. Remember, the truth may be hidden, but as long as we keep the investigation alive, it's never truly lost. I'm Brett, and I'll see you next time on Sunday Night Mystery. But for now, stay curious, stay vigilant, and be sure to guard yourself against the darkness that surrounds us all. I'll see you next week on Sunday Night Mystery. These podcasts are based on real unsolved murder cases. However, some elements have been dramatised or fictionalised for narrative purposes. While every effort has been made to accurately represent the facts, certain events, dialogues and characters have been reconstructed or adapted to enhance in the storytelling. The intent of our podcast is to inform, engage and explore possible scenarios, not to accuse or implicate any individual. Any similarities to real people living or dead outside of the documented historical cases are purely coincidental. The views and interpretations are purely of this podcast and do not reflect those of law enforcement or any official investigative bodies. Listeners should approach the content as a blend of factual research and creative non-fiction. If you have any information related to any of our cases, please contact the relevant authorities.